Let's take a look at the Iron Cross, das Eiserne Kreuz. It was first established during the fight against Napoleon, and its last iteration happened during the Second World War, which of course includes the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. But first, let's look at the origins in the Napoleonic Wars, which the Germans also call Befreiungskriege, or Wars of Liberation. If we look at the symbol and its name, there are two elements, the iron and the cross. Let's first discuss iron. During the Napoleonic Wars there was often a reference to the Eiserne Zeit, literally iron time, yet in meaning it is hard times. The term iron was already associated with war and hard times, due to poems and proverbs. The cross itself of course goes back to the Teutonic Order, the Romanticification of the Middle Ages, and of course Christianity. The Iron Cross as a medal was established by King Frederick William III of Prussia in 1813. Now it was not just a medal like those before, there were clear differences to other medals. First off, it could be awarded to officers, enlisted men and civilians. This was a rather new idea, since many medals were usually only for officers. To a certain degree this was also influenced by Napoleon's Legion of Honor. Additionally, it was a wartime medal, meaning it couldn't be earned in peacetime and thus had to be re-established for every successive war. Thus the year of its establishment is always printed on the front, namely 1813, 1870, 1914 and 1939. Note that certain wars like the Austro-Prussian War didn't see a re-establishment of the Iron Cross. Furthermore, iron was intentionally used as material, and besides a silver outline, no other precious metal were used. This is also in relation to the Gold gab ich für Eisen, I give gold for iron movement, in which jewelry was spent for the war effort, for which people received an iron ring or a brooch with such an inscription. Now let's look at the criteria and the different variants of the Iron Cross of 1813. It was only awarded for the duration of the war. It came in three versions: the second class, the first class and the Großkreuz or Grand Cross, for the victory in battle, defense or conquest of a fortress. To achieve the first class it was prerequisite to earn the second class beforehand. And since it was an egalitarian medal that could be awarded to both enlisted men and officers in the identical form, there were different criteria for enlisted men and officers. Namely, soldiers had bravery as the determining factor, whereas for generals it was success in command. Yet very important, both would wear the same Iron Cross. As the king noted in this case, the soldier would be fully equal with the general. Der Soldat mit dem General ganz gleich. Furthermore, it could also be awarded to civilians that contributed substantially to the war effort, yet those had a different ribbon, which distinguished them from the ones earned in combat. Thus it had an egalitarian and integrational aspect. Sämtliche Kriegsverdienste wurden im Prinzip mit dem gleichen Ordenszeichen belohnt. Insofern billigt man dem Volk nicht nur die gleiche Ehre zu wie seinen Eliten, sondern beabsichtigte auch, es in einem gemeinsamen Ehrenzeichen gleichsam zusammenzuschweißen. All war merits were rewarded in principle with the same medal. In this respect, not only did the people receive the same honor as the elites, but it was also intended to weld both together with a common badge of honor. Another important aspect is that the Iron Cross was a Prussian medal, yet in the announcement the king referred mostly to the German nation. In another announcement from the same day he mentions Germany but didn't mention Prussia at all. You need to take into account here that Germany as a unified nation state did not exist before 1871. Let's take a short look at the design. In general it was kept rather frugal. The material of the black core was iron, whereas the outline was silver. As mentioned before, iron itself at this time was symbolic for sacrifice, trial, harshness and honor. At the top of the core was the crown, and below the initials of King Frederick William. In the center were 3 oak leaves, and at the bottom the year of establishment, 1813. The ribbon depended if it was earned in combat or in a non-combat role. The combat ribbon was black with 2 white stripes, whereas the Nicht-Kämpferband was a white ribbon with 2 black stripes. Note that the colors black and white were the Prussian colors. To give you some idea about the numbers, from 1813 to 1815 the following number of Iron Crosses were awarded. A total of 369 civilians received the Iron Cross second class. Whereas on the military side 5,928 enlisted men and 2,944 officers received the Iron Cross second class. The Iron Cross first class was awarded to 2 civilians, 67 enlisted men and 568 officers. Besides creating the award itself, King Frederick William III took measures to increase the popularity of the Iron Cross as a symbol. For instance with memorial plaques of fallen soldiers, which in opinion of the comrades would have received the Iron Cross, should be decorated. This was the first step using the Iron Cross in context of graves. In later periods like the Second World War, the Iron Cross would be used for graves in general and also for obituaries. Additionally, the Iron Cross was also added to other elements like the flags of certain units and on the Brandenburg Gate, where it was surrounded by a laurel wreath and crowned by the Prussian eagle. Now the second establishment of the Iron Cross was in 1870, when the French declared war on Prussia, which was joined by the other German states. The Iron Cross was still a Prussian medal, yet now it could also be earned by soldiers and officers that were allied with Prussia. Yet the ribbon was still kept in black and white, although someone already suggested it should be in the colors black, white and red, since those were the colors of the German Confederation and soon those of the German Empire. After the war, the Iron Cross was transformed completely into a German symbol, leaving behind its Prussian origin in popular culture. It symbolized loyalty to the Emperor and fatherland, while also retaining the soldiers' virtues of duty, patriotism, bravery, sacrifice and heroism. Now it's important to remember that the Franco-Prussian War was a resounding success for Prussia and its allies, and led to the unification of Germany. Thus the Iron Cross also carried with it the liberation from Napoleon and the unification of Germany, in addition to two victorious wars against the French. Thus at the beginning of the First World War, some saw the Iron Cross as a holy combat symbol, Heiliges Kampfeszeichen, and it was again suggested to use a black, white, red ribbon. Yet the idea was rejected and noted that the Iron Cross was a Prussian medal. Note that the Imperial German Army consists of several armies, like the Prussian and Bavarian armies. Yet since Emperor Wilhelm II was also the commander-in-chief of the Imperial German Army and Prussian king, the Iron Cross could be received by all German soldiers. Since the First World War took far longer than expected, and the criteria for earning an Iron Cross were lower than before, the Iron Cross was awarded quite often. At the end of the war, about 1 out of 2.5 soldiers had received one. This was expressed by certain names like Casino-Kreuze, Casino Crosses, because soldiers in the rear areas could earn the cross as well. Similar to previous conflicts, the Iron Cross as a symbol became even more popular. This time it reached far beyond the military and trenches. It was used by the German Air Force as an emblem, for death notifications of soldiers, and also extensively with civilian objects like shot glasses and handbags. Now we come to the Iron Cross during the Second World War. There are several aspects to consider. First, the Iron Cross was previously established by kings and emperors, yet the Nazis weren't particularly fond of monarchism. Additionally, many other medals like the Prussian Pour les Marie or the Bavarian Maximilian Orden were basically elitist medals that were mainly received by officers and were also bound to various royal houses. Furthermore, the Nazis wanted to prevent an inflationary use of the Iron Cross like it happened in the First World War. As such, the criteria were changed. Previously, the Iron Cross could be awarded for non-combat actions as well. This was not possible anymore. Das Eiserne Kreuz wird ausschließlich für besondere Tapferkeit vor dem Feind und für hervorragende Verdienste in der Truppenführung verliehen. The Iron Cross is bestowed solely for outstanding valor while engaging the enemy and for exemplary actions in troop command. Thus it was now a pure combat medal. Of course, there were other medals that could be awarded for non-combat duties and also to civilians, but those were not Iron Crosses. Now let's look at the different versions. There were the Iron Cross Second Class, the Iron Cross First Class and the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, das Ritterkreuz des Eisernen Kreuzes. Note that the second and first class Iron Crosses were usually called EK2 and EK1 in German. There was also the Grand Cross of the Iron Cross, but it was only awarded to Göring. Again, it was necessary to be awarded the previous stage before being awarded the higher class. Now since the First World War only ended 21 years ago, many veterans would also serve again. Yet those who earned the Iron Cross already in the First World War would have to earn the Iron Cross again, and couldn't progress directly to the next class. Thus a repetition class was introduced that showed that the Iron Cross of that particular class was earned a second time. Now let's look at the design, because there was a clear distinction to the previous iterations of the Iron Crosses. The overall shape stayed the same, as did the positions of the year of establishment, this time 1939. Yet this time there was no crown, no initials. In the center there was a swastika, which you have to imagine, since I have plenty of troubles with YouTube anyway. Then there was the ribbon color of black, white and red. So the Prussian colors were finally gone. Note, this was only important for the Iron Cross second class and the Knight's Cross, since the first class didn't have a ribbon as it was mounted with a pin. Now the backside for the second class and Knight's Cross looked identical to the front side, except the swastika was removed and instead of 1939 the number 1813 was embossed. Note that in previous establishments the backside also included the oak leaves, the initials of the king and the crown. Thus this was a clear break in tradition, since most references were removed. Now let's take a closer look at the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Note, it didn't have a direct predecessor, yet it basically replaced the old necklet medals of the various royal houses. Note that the necklet medal is worn around the neck instead of being pinned to the chest. Generally, medals that are worn around the neck are usually of the highest order. See for instance the US Medal of Honor, which is also worn across the neck, although it should be noted that the British Victoria Cross isn't. So if you see an Iron Cross worn around the neck, it should be a Knight's Cross. This had one major benefit, since there was now a clear hierarchy of medals, whereas beforehand there were various necklet medals of different houses that in a way competed with the Iron Cross. The Knight's Cross was a continuation of the Iron Cross. As such, it was required to already have earned the Iron Cross second class and first class. Any award of the Knight's Cross needed to pass through the high command of the Wehrmacht, and Hitler had to decide on it. About 50% of those decisions were positive. Now in 1939 there was only the base version of the Knight's Cross, but in 1940 the Knight's Cross with oak leaves was added. In 1941 two more variants were added, the Knight's Cross with swords and then with diamonds. Similarly, in 1941 the criteria for receiving the Knight's Cross were stepped up. Now it was required to perform besonders kampfentscheidende Tapferkeitstaten, special combat decisive acts of bravery. The only sub-branch of the Wehrmacht that had a clear regulation was the U-Boot-Waffe, the submarine force. Here the key factor was tonnage of the enemy ships sunk that determined the variant of the Knight's Cross. For all other branches it was basically decided on recommendation. Finally in 1944 the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaf swords and diamonds was added. Das Ritterkreuz mit goldenem Eichenlaub, Schwertern und Brillanten. It should have been awarded at most 12 times, similar to the Scottish Order of the Thistle. Yet only the Luftwaffe ace and Stucker pilot Hans-Ulrich Rudel received it before the war ended. For the Second World War the numbers of awarded Iron Crosses and even Knight's Crosses aren't exactly certain. My sources note that the Iron Cross second class was awarded 2.3 million times, the Iron Cross first class around 300,000 times, and according to the German Federal Archive, a minimum of 7,124 Knight's Crosses were awarded, although 7,300 is more likely. Yet there are different numbers out there as well. For the higher form of the Knight's Cross, the numbers are as follows. The Knight's Cross with oak leaves was awarded 863 times, the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords 169 times, the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds 27 times, and finally, as mentioned before, the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords and diamonds 1 time. Now I assume you probably want to know how to tell on a photo what version of an Iron Cross was worn. So let's start at the bottom. The Iron Cross second class was worn in the buttonhole of the uniform during the day of the award, or on special occasions. This is important because usually only the ribbon was visible, either in the buttonhole or worn above the left breast pocket. So it is very rare that you will see a photo where the Iron Cross second class itself is visible. This is in contrast to the Iron Cross first class, which is always worn on the left breast pocket and was fastened with a clasp. Thus it was visible at all time, unless you were hitting the dirt. And finally, the Knight's Cross. You probably know it already, yes, it was worn around the neck. So it is actually very easy to distinguish if someone earned an Iron Cross or a Knight's Cross from quite some distance. Now before we conclude this video, a final note on the Balkenkreuz, the beam or bar cross, which sometimes gets confused with the Iron Cross. It was first introduced in the last months of the First World War, and then saw extensive usage as an emblem in the Second World War. It is basically a simplified version of an Iron Cross, but technically it's not an Iron Cross. And remember rule number 10, be precise in your speech. So let's conclude the video. The Iron Cross, although originally a Prussian medal, was used from the very beginning in a German context. And with each iteration it became a more popular symbol in Germany and less associated with Prussia. Over its history, the rate of awards increased significantly, most notably during the First World War, whereas the 1813 and 1817 versions were awarded in a ratio of about 1 to 20. In the First World War this changed to 1 to 2.5 and to 1 to 5.74 in the Second World War. Although it should be noted that the World Wars took far longer and were a bit more extensive, as the term World War correctly suggests. Well, I think we can leave it at that. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this content, consider supporting me on Patreon. Remember, every Reichsmark helps improving the videos. Special thanks to Rob for helping me out with a question. And if you want to learn more, check out this video about panzer tactics or this one about Prussian infantry. And as always, sources are linked in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.